Many years ago, while promoting the book Left Behind to all my friends in hopes that they could be saved from a future coming tribulation by being raptured with the Church of Jesus Christ, the true believing church of the world, I was told by a Christian saying, "Don't even bother, the rapture has already happened." And of course this confused me, because when did it happen? And I'd heard a lot of people talking in circles of like, oh yeah, it happened a while back, and some people thought it happened only a couple of years before, others thought it happened in 1917, others had thought all these different dates were popping up, and it really kind of baffled me. But it was when I got turned on to knowing that the Bible itself told us when the rapture was supposed to be, the rapture of the church, the escaping of the church into the kingdom of heaven, the departure, apostasia, as the Greek says, other than just the falling away, but it also means departure. What fascinated me the most was that people were even making this claim when clearly such incredible minds as C.I. Scofield, the author of the Scofield Reference Bible, let alone great theologians like Tim LaHaye and Thomas Ice, and of course Hal Lindsey. I mean, hey, how can anybody be so foolish as to even question this, especially when the rapture had been known about for so long? This kind of confused me. Yeah, it startled me enough to start thinking about it. Was the rapture already past? So, take this to a future time, a long future time ahead, to where finally one day I just got kind of bored and went, I should look into this study. Now, they call it preterism, and I know a lot of people have gotten very angry for me saying I'm not a preterist, but here's why. There's too many conflicting theories regarding preterist beliefs and theologies where I can't be closed into this one gap or this gap or whatever. When you start having this separation, it's sectarianism, and unto itself, preterism has more sects than it should have, quite frankly. So I'm a Christian who believes the Bible. The Bible tells me that the rapture was supposed to happen within the very generation of those who saw Christ pierced. Some of the apostles would still be alive. The word mello, meaning soon, it's going to happen soon. I'm forgetting some of the other words as well in Greek, but some of them are very soon, some are shortly. Oh man, I wish I could remember some of those words right now, but I'm not a language expert. That's why I always have people translate these things for me, but I can see the writing right in front of me, and there are the words right there, right next to them. And basically, the rapture had to happen then, so I looked into the subject matter, and sure as anything, there were writings on this from the ancient world. But what confused me was that the so-called early Christian post-apostolic fathers, meaning the ones after the authors of the Bible, made no mention of this rapture. Certainly the Epistle of Barnabas, as it's known, the Epistle of Pseudo-Barnabas, speaks of the destruction of the temple, but doesn't speak of the rapture of the church. Then you have, of course, the earliest we know of in this category being Clement, and then Ignatius, Polycarp, all the way to Justin Martyr in the 150s, and probably the last of the really great ancients, although his own writing on the end times has led to more confusion than probably anybody. Irenaeus, his Against Heresies is a masterpiece, especially against Gnosticism. But I digress. There was no mention of the second coming of Christ actually having happened, and that was in conjunction with the time period of the rapture. So I've done talks on this before. I've given a lot of details regarding many ancient writings that record the rapture, but I want to concentrate on the most distinctive one as the fact that it was written 5 years after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. And for those of you who have become familiar with my readings of this. It comes from Josephus, the Wars of the Jews. This was written, as I say, 5 years after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. He was basically under the patronage of the Emperor Vespasian and then his son Titus, so much so that I believe his name was Mattathias ben Josephus. I hope I got the name completely right there. But anyways, he changed his name to Flavius Josephus because he was adopted as a Flavian, a part of the Flavian dynasty, which is what Vespasian, Titus, and also Domitian belonged to. But anyways, let's move onwards with this. You have one that's written in the 1st century, probably written about 11 years after the final writing of the New Testament. Many believe that the final writing was actually the epistle of 2 Peter, which would have been around 64 AD. This is just a generalization. Many believe that the revelation of Jesus Christ was actually written late 50s or early 60s. There's a possibility that John may have actually been one of those who was killed along with James, as it was written not only in Eusebius but also in Hegesippus, and just a lot of these histories that have come down to us through the times. And the incident that I'm about to read to you actually is referenced in Eusebius as well, the church history, which was commissioned by Constantine, the so-called Great. I don't believe he was a Christian based upon everything I've read and seen, but maybe he became one at the end of his life. But certainly his ushering in of the Roman Empire as a Christian empire turned out to be one of the worst things that ever happened to Christianity, and led to all of the occultism, all of the mysticism, all the false writings. It was just one of the worst things that ever happened. Certainly Helena was no help on this, being Constantine's mother. But as I say, let's go back to the actual writing itself, because this is important. We're looking at the possibility of this being the very first writing regarding the rapture. And because it's within the 1st century, this makes it difficult for all the people who say, we have no idea whether it even could have happened. Well, this is the oldest writing. It's so close to the Bible, it's crazy. It's certainly long before Ignatius, certainly long before Polycarp, and we're still arguing over whether Clement was written before the destruction of the temple, since there's references of the temple in it, but whether it was written after or whatnot, we just don't know. What we do know, 75 AD, the Wars of the Jews. And this is what's actually written in it regarding signs of the end times. And this is written by a former Jewish priest of the temple who had nothing to do with the side of the Christians. And this is regarding what was going on in the temple at the time of basically Pentecost in 66 AD. And this was just before the outbreak of the Jewish revolt and of the blood sacrifice completely ending at the Temple of Solomon, and the actual blood being spilt in the temple, which of course made it sacrilegious, and it was the end of the sacrificial age, the beginning of the new dispensation age by the Parousia of Christ for 42 months. So this is what's written in the Wars of the Jews. Thus were the miserable people persuaded by these deceivers. I believe that's a reference to the Zealots, in particular Eleazar ben Ananus and John of Gischala. And such as belied God himself, while they did not attend nor give credit to the signs that were so evident and did so plainly foretell their future desolation, but like men infatuated, without either eyes to see or minds to consider, did not regard the denunciations that God made to them. Thus there was a star resembling a sword which stood over the city, and a comet that continued a whole year. Thus also before the Jews' rebellion, and before those commotions which preceded the war, when the people were come in great crowds to the feast of unleavened bread, on the 8th day of the month Xanthicus, which is Nisan, and at the 9th hour of the night, so great a light shone round the altar and the holy house, that it appeared to be bright daytime, which light lasted for half an hour. I want to stop here because I believe it's from Jeremiah, where this was supposed to be a fulfillment of where a night would become as day and day would become as night. This would be the night becoming as day, and of course the day becoming as night would be when Christ died on the cross. This is why Christ was not ruling as an earthly king like people believe the Messiah was supposed to be, but instead was ruling as a heavenly king because he'd been rejected by his own people, just as the prophets had foretold. So anyways, moving onwards, this light seemed to be a good sign to the unskillful, but was so interpreted by the sacred scribes, wonderful people, as to portend those events that followed immediately upon it. And we remember the scribes very well in their battles with Jesus, so don't go fooling yourselves. These were probably the most egomaniacal of all, much along with the Pharisees and Sadducees, who were more worried about what their power base was rather than the fact that God's Son was standing before them and he was the Messiah. At the same festival also, a heifer, a young virgin female calf, as she was led by the high priest to be sacrificed, brought forth a lamb in the midst of the temple. Never been disputed ever. This actually did happen. Imagine a lamb coming from the stomach of a virgin cow. I mean, the significance of that alone tells you, yeah, you know what? Oh, this is a little scary. And for those of us who are Christians, we already know the significance of a virgin giving birth to the Lamb of God. So, very important passage right here. And this is from Josephus, 75 AD. Moreover, the eastern gate of the inner court of the temple, which was of brass and vastly heavy, and had been with difficulty shut by 20 men, and rested upon a basis armed with iron, and had bolts fastened very deep into the firm floor, which was there made of one entire stone, was seen to be opened of its own accord about the 6th hour of the night. Now, just imagine how many tons that would be, just opening by itself. Think about that, folks. Now, those that kept watch in the temple came hereupon running to the captain of the temple and told him of it, who then came up thither, and I can never remember whether that's pronounced hither or thither, but there it is, and not without great difficulty was able to shut the gate again. Notice the difficulty. This also appeared to the vulgar to be a very happy prodigy, as if God did thereby open them the gate of happiness. But the men of learning understood it, that the security of their holy house was dissolved of its own accord, and that the gate was opened for the advantage of their enemies. Kind of reminds you of the removing of the Shekinah glory. I believe it was in the book of Ezekiel where this occurred. Manasseh? Was that the king at the time? I can never remember. Once again, I need to be much better at my Bible, but look it up. You can find it online. So these publicly declared that this signal foreshadowed the desolation that was coming upon them. The abomination of desolation. Think about that. That's a New Testament reference right there from a Jewish author who was not a Christian. Besides these, a few days after that feast, on the 21st day of the month, Artemisius, which is Jair, a certain prodigious and incredible phenomenon appeared. I suppose the account of it would seem to be a fable, were it not related by those who saw it. and were not the events that followed it of so considerable a nature as to deserve such signals? For before sunsetting, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds and surrounding cities. Remember the way Jesus was supposed to come riding along and with the sword coming out of his mouth, being the Word of God? Remember that little incident from the book of Revelation? Do you also remember the countless Old Testament verses that can be ascribed, along with the, let's just say, the incident with Elisha, where they were able to see the chariots of the gods in the sky when they were surrounded by the enemies of God? Yeah, it sounds very, very much a part of that. But let's actually do that again. A certain prodigious and incredible phenomenon appeared. I suppose the account of it would seem to be a fable, were it not related by those that saw it, and were not the events that followed it of so considerable a nature as to deserve such signals. For before sunsetting, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running among the clouds and surrounding of cities. The Lord's army. Awesome. Moreover, at that feast, which we call Pentecost, as the priests were going by night into the inner court of the temple, as their custom was to perform their sacred ministrations, they said that in the first place they felt a quaking and heard a great noise. And after that they heard a sound as of a great multitude saying, "Let us remove hence." The spirit world leaving the temple. Now, I don't know about you guys, that sounds pretty much like the descriptions of the rapture. And this would be the oldest one. Now, this same incident is spoken of by Tacitus in the surviving fragments of his histories. He's the author of the Annals of Imperial Rome, as I've shared in other commentaries, which you're more than welcome to check out, where there's a lot more details. And this was at the same time as the incidences that were written by Suetonius and Dio-Cassius, my mistake, in the Lives of the 12 Caesars and the Roman histories. At the same time, Caesar was off in Greece working on, I believe it was a peninsula, and suddenly they heard a trumpet blowing, and suddenly the spirit world is leaving right in front of their eyes. Phantoms, basically, is what I recall were the words that were being described, and suddenly they're disappearing off into the heavens. Same time period. Whoa, 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 whoa. Trumpets blowing. You got the army of the Lord up in the sky, and you're hearing this whirlwind sound, this rush, which I believe was the rushing sound, I believe, was the one from Tacitus. But anyways, you have this description. But this same incident is backed up by Eusebius in his church history. And then you have later in the medieval period, there's an anonymous author who wrote of this one as well, but also the famous one by Sefer ben Yosephan. And you get all these added details together where none of this has ever actually been refuted. And it's backed up by multiple authors. So was the rapture recorded? Oh, maybe not on a video camera like we would have today, but it was recorded. And it was recorded by a contemporary. Now, was he at the temple at the time when this occurred? I don't remember in my studies on Josephus whether he was in town or not, but he was a priest at this same time. So if he was an eyewitness, this would have been known, but he would have also been able to go to everyone else who was there and record this. So I believe this is most likely the rapture of the church, 66 AD. The 7-year tribulation, there's always been questions regarding its timing. Late 63 through early 70 AD has usually been the numbers mulled around. I always say 64 through 70 just to be safe on the 7-year tribulation, but we know that this is the time period. So we're looking right now at 66 AD is the most likely time that the rapture would have occurred. Here's the thing, if the rapture didn't occur, you can throw away your Bibles. Because the prophets were madmen, the apostles were madmen, and their leader of this mad parade was Jesus. And I don't believe for 2 seconds that Jesus Christ was not the Son of God. I absolutely believe it. The archaeology, the history, everything that I did to try and disprove the Bible blew up in my face back in the days. And I made my promise to God, if you can prove this to me, I'll be a dedicated follower for the rest of my life, but you got to prove to me what the real deal is. And yeah, what do you know? I sleep much better at night. So the rapture already happened, folks. Second coming of Christ already happened. Oh, it didn't happen in the way that everybody else wants it to, in the left behind kind of sense, and where all the glory's on us. No, the new heaven and the new earth are spiritual. All you have to do is look at the apocalyptic language which is contained within it, and you can find their matching resources in the Old Testament. I mean, the 4 horsemen is from Zechariah, if I'm not mistaken. And there's actually an incredible book that did a really good job on it that I read back in the day. Back to the Future, a study in the book of Revelation by Ralph Bass Jr., which is very interesting. He doesn't touch upon the rapture, but he touches upon everything else, and I remember it being verse by verse. Other people say that David Chilton's Days of Vengeance, they say that's the best. I still have to read it. I look forward to having that chance someday. But there's plenty of other great resources. I enjoyed Gary DeMar's End Time Fiction, and I still haven't read his End Times Madness, but that looks pretty good. There have been a lot of great books. I think, was it Before Jerusalem Fell, regarding dating the Bible books and the end times. Ken Gentry, I think, was the author of that. As I say, there's all sorts of different resources you can get out there to check this stuff, but this is the main focal point that everybody goes to, is the rapture. So, did it happen? Absolutely. Is this the actual recording of it? I don't know, but it's the best case I've ever seen in my life, and it fits the exact time period that it was supposed to happen in. So hopefully this has been a blessing to you, and feel free to check out some of my other End Times Theology, Last Days Theology spoken words, and see what you think of them, and also look around at other people's material. We can't just stick with one source. I study every kind of source I can. I still listen to a lot of the dispensational futurist stuff, because there might be some interesting stuff that I can learn from it, or I can at least say, okay, if that's an argument that's being made, let's take a look into it. And if it proves to be unbiblical compared to what I'm reading here, maybe we can get that expressed in a spoken word, because Christians like me aren't accepting money for this kind of stuff. I work a day job at a regular place. I'm not asking for your love gifts in a building you call a church when, the word ecclesia means congregation. It means assembly, not a building. So anyways, God bless each and every last one of you. I hope this has been helpful to you, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Hopefully you'll give it all to the glory of God.